felt like I was just kind of going through all of these milestones, checking them off, not because I genuinely wanted to do them, but because they were things that I was supposed to do. If I left now, that would be okay. You know, life would go on. When I traveled to Mongolia and I bought 2 horses and took them into the wilderness on my own. The horse that was carrying all my luggage spooked and I fell on my forehead. So yeah, that was a pretty bad fall and had a concussion. In Dead Horse, there is a culture of always keeping your car keys inside your car because there's polar bears. Socotra is very much a magical place. There is something about this island that makes you feel like you're almost in like a parallel reality. Now I see it as being able to choose a life that fits you, a life that feels authentic to you, a life that makes you feel alive.
Eva, welcome to the Travel Diaries. It is so lovely to see you and your gorgeous dog. How are you?
We're doing great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're just here up in the Carpathian Mountains in my shepherd's hut, taking
So
a little bit
pretty.
of a breather between 2 big book tours. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's gorgeous here, but very, very basic. It's, you know, super simple. I don't have running water here or electricity, so it's quite rough, but lovely.
So for people who aren't watching, can you take us on a little tour of your space? I see you've got a lovely kind of wood burner behind you.
Yeah, so I'm just about to put that on. It's still quite warm, so yeah, but this is what I do in the evenings, just put the stove on. This is my bed. This is where Vilk sleeps on this side. Got my little window here. And yeah,
Oh,
it's
it's
pretty small.
beautiful.
It's tiny, but you know, I spend most of my time here whenever I'm home. Well, all of my time here. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a genuine shepherd's hut that's like maybe 60 years old. And I just renovated it last autumn. So now I get to actually live here.
What made you choose this area of Poland? Because it is
Mm.
beautiful, but you have been somebody who hasn't put down roots for a long time. So why now and why there?
Yeah, I mean, I've been traveling almost full time for 9 years now, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
I mean, travel is amazing, but I feel like after such a long time, I just felt really called to build some kind of like a safe haven, you know, a little
Yeah.
hideaway of my own. I've met so many people on my travels who have inspired me with their lifestyles. Some of the people that inspired me the most have been shepherds. And I've just become completely kind of obsessed with the idea of buying my own land and, you know, a little wooden hut, which has happened. And, you know, I am Polish. Though I never thought I would ever return to my home.
Mhm.
You know, I left pretty early on when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And through all my travels, I just always assumed that I would end up somewhere, let's say, you know, tropical, perhaps a bit warmer, a bit
Yeah.
more like, you know, like a digital nomad type of destination. But something just pulled me back home. And I'm so excited to be in a place that actually feels authentically mine. Like, you know, it's part of my identity. So it's not always easy living here. You know, the winters are pretty tough, and in general, getting up here to my property is quite difficult.
Is it very remote?
It's not too far from a village, but it's high up on a mountain, and so it's very, very hard to actually get here. For the first almost 2 years that I had this property, I actually had to walk up to my land. There was no way to drive up here. There was no way
Wow.
to get here in any kind of vehicle. So yeah, I mean, you know, I remember the first year I carried a metal bathtub up to my property because I wanted to
No.
like have a little tub that I could bathe in. And yeah, there was no way to get it up here except on my own back.
Oh my God, you are a superhuman. Are you a fan of that the program New Lives in the Wild, the Ben Fogle one?
Yeah, I really like it. Yeah, it's
I
such a
mean,
such
you are, why are you have you been asked to be on it?
I guess I shouldn't say anything just yet.
Oh, watch this space. Exciting. I mean, the ultimate, Ava. That's so exciting. How cool. Well, I mean, I've given the introduction to your kind of life in the intro to the episode, but just as a little recap for listeners who are discovering you for the first
Mm,
time,
mm.
your life has obviously taken this extraordinary turn. So can you take me back to that moment that you realized like this is not actually my dream life?
Yeah, I think, there wasn't like a single revelation where I just knew that I had to leave everything behind. I feel like it was, for me, kind of a slow unfolding of
Mhm.
everything that I kind of knew to be true. I when I graduated from uni, got my first job and, got into a relationship that eventually became a marriage. Like I felt like I was just kind of going through all of these milestones, checking them off as not because I genuinely wanted to do them, but because they were things that I was supposed to do. And I didn't really think much about what I wanted out of life. So after, several years, like in my mid 20s, I guess I just started asking myself questions. Including, is this really what I want? And there were some triggers, like, my then fiance and husband wanting to have kids and me definitely not wanting to have kids.
Mm.
Me kind of getting a job in London behind a desk where I really knew deep down that was not the kind of job that I could do for the rest of my life, that I needed something very, very different, something of my own, working towards building my own dream instead of someone else's. So
Mhm.
I feel like it was just layers unpeeling gradually until things kind of imploded for me over the course of several months. But the big kind of culminating moment was when I took a solo trip to Marrakech. And I remember sitting up in the Medina in a little cafe, kind of looking over, all the people who are just crisscrossing that really busy market in Marrakech, life kind of going on like a river. And I just realized that if I left now, that would be okay. Life would go on and I could build something new, something different. So I feel like I owe that moment to Marrakech, that
Wow.
moment of like sudden bravery and deciding, okay, I'm going to do it. So the next day, that happened to be New Year's Eve. Um, the next day, I called my flatmates in London. I told them that I was moving out of the apartment, called my family to tell them that I was leaving for an indefinite period of time and also quit my job. By then, my relationship had already dissolved. So yeah, I guess that at that moment, I was just like, okay, if I don't do this now, I'll never do it. So let's go.
Amazing. And I guess then travel has been punctuated by more and more kind of emotional awakenings as you spent more
Yeah.
time on the road.
So I feel like with travel, it really does that to you, right?
Mm.
It shakes you out of that existential kind of that stupor, that kind of highway of life, and shows you that there's so many different ways to do life. It just kind of opens your eyes, as long as you're willing to let it open your eyes, right? So for me, I had so many moments like that throughout my travels. I was very, very blessed to have them because I think whenever whenever I thought of a new trip or decided to go somewhere, I always wanted for the new destination that I was heading to kind of to be something very different, to be something that pushes my limits, that challenges me in some way. So I think the very first kind of experience that really did that for me when I traveled solo was when I traveled to Mongolia and I bought two horses and took them into the wilderness on my own. Keep in mind, I had never solo camped before in my life up to that point. I had never done anything like that. No, not even like any multi-day hiking on my own up until that point. So it was a pretty wild decision. I mean, looking back, probably quite reckless. Would not recommend. Would not recommend. But being out there, just me and the horses, and then, the vastness of the Mongolian landscape, I felt for the first time in my life, I think, actually free. Like there was nobody there to judge me. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to think of anyone. It was just me and this like beautiful, beautiful nature and these incredible animals, and that's all there was. And I guess I'd never up until then had felt that level of freedom and, you know, aliveness, if I can call it
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Like a vitality.
Yes, exactly. Like
Mm.
you feel like you're so deeply alive and so connected. And I guess if I had never really pushed myself to do an adventure of that caliber, then perhaps I wouldn't have known that feeling. And yeah, what an amazing privilege just to know that feeling.
So for people who haven't been to Mongolia, which is most of us, how would you paint a picture of the landscape?
Mongolia is, it's a pretty special place because it's a very big country. It's half the size of India, so it's quite large.
Mm.
Most of it is mountains and grasslands and steppe, though, you've also got the Gobi Desert in the south, one of the biggest deserts in the world. And it's a big country, but there's very few people that live there, only 3 million people,
Mm.
and 5 million horses, or even 6 million horses now.
Mm.
So it's very empty. It's one of the least densely populated countries on earth. And you really feel that going in, because when you go in and when you maybe go just, a little bit outside of one of the few cities, you suddenly find yourself very much alone and very much kind of, out there in this huge landscape that has very little infrastructure, very few buildings, no fences. And there's just something there that makes you feel very free and quite feral, I would say. You definitely like, I remember like the very first time that I traveled to Mongolia many years back, I stepped foot in it and I just felt like, oh my God, this is where the legends of like Genghis Khan were made. Like you feel that. You feel like the country hasn't really changed that much. And the culture has really not changed that much since those times. They still eat a lot of the same food traditionally,
What kind of things would that be?
a lot of meat. Yeah, meat is a very, very big part of the Mongolian diet, with very minimal spices, pretty much no spices except for just a little bit of salt. And then
Right.
you've got sort of different types of cheese, a very, very hard cheese that you kind of chew on. And there's really not no vegetables in the traditional Mongolian diet, because traditionally the nomads weren't able to grow really any vegetables or any plants, because they were constantly traveling.
Yeah.
So they had their animals and they could either milk them and make cheese or kill them and have meat. So yeah, the bulk of that traditional Mongolian diet is still very much something that people kind of celebrate and cherish to this day. Although, of course, in cities, have all kinds of restaurants and international cuisine, but the traditional lifestyle is still very similar to what it was 500, 600 years ago, which is kind of amazing.
It's one of those cultures that feels that it's more perfectly preserved than
Yeah.
most. So,
Yes,
the only
exactly.
reason that I know this is because I love Race Across the World, and the final two episodes they have to cross Mongolia. So I guess a lot of my listeners will be getting a first taste of Mongolia watching that, and the majesty of the landscape. I mean, every city or town that they seem to go into is just framed by these mountain peaks, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, it makes you feel like no other place in the world, truly. It's like moving back in time. And yeah, I highly recommend Mongolia to anyone who kind of likes to be out in nature. But I guess it should always come with a word of warning. It is not the easiest destination. It is quite challenging. A lot of the time you'll probably go, for days without taking a shower. Like, don't count on any luxuries. You're gonna be roughing it. It's gonna be a lot of dust.
For somebody who wanted to dip their toe in the water and experience it not on their own on horseback, which I want to dive a little bit deeper into, but as just a traveler, where would be like the first port of call? Because the capital is very polluted, isn't it? And it's not a reflection of the broader kind of more pure, vast Mongolia. So where would you say would be like a place to head to? Do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a traveler, you don't really have much of a choice. You have to fly into Ulaanbaatar, which is
Yeah.
the capital, that kind of dusty, polluted capital. Sadly, it's not the most scenic place, but in a way, it's worth seeing it and then experiencing the absolute contrast that is the rest of Mongolia.
Yeah.
But I would say, there's so much. It's such a huge country. You could spend a year traveling all across it and still not see everything. But I think getting in touch with a local guide or renting a car or, renting like a 4x4 and then heading down to the Gobi. I think that's always a win, because in the Gobi you can hang out with the camel herders of the Gobi. They have these twin humped camels that are just so like beautiful and amazing and huge, such majestic animals. So you can, live with a camel herder, or you can head up into the mountains and go horse riding. There's all these horse trekking camps out there where of course you could, if you really insisted, you probably could buy your own horses, but I would recommend signing up for a horse trek. You can go for a day or 3, or you can even go for 2 weeks up into the mountains. So I think it's really the outdoor enthusiasts like paradise. But again, you have to be willing to, kind of get dirty and dusty a little bit, and and become one with nature. That's part of it.
But you had these kind of pretty hairy moments at times. You in the book, you describe a scene where the saddle breaks and your satellite messengers stopped working and you're completely alone. Can you take us back to that moment and kind of tell me what it was like and how you got there and how you got out of it?
Yeah, there were so many points during that adventure that I felt like giving up, that I felt were just too overwhelming and too much for me. And, on day 1, for example, of my trek, well, the first full day, which I guess was technically day 2.
Just to zoom out a bit, what actually was the kind of trek? So where was the start and end?
I had designed this route that was kind of a loop around one of the national parks in Mongolia. So it took me from a place where there was a road. So that's where I got dropped off with the horses. And then kind of I would go around for about, my plan was to go for 2 weeks and then kind of loop back around. But on my first full day out there in the saddle, one of my horses spooked. So I had 2 horses. I was riding one and the other one was carrying the luggage. And the horse that was carrying all my luggage spooked. I don't know why. There was a tree, there was a sheep, I have no idea. And he just kind of ran off with all of my stuff and started galloping.
God.
And, because he was galloping so fast and freaking out, he managed to tear his saddlebags. So all of my stuff was suddenly just flying off everywhere, onto the meadow. And I just see this horse galloping away, and I'm like, oh my God, I'll never be able to catch him. This is over before it even began, But as luck would have it, and I feel like luck plays a pretty big role in everything that I do travel-wise. As luck would have it, there was a nomadic family that was living nearby in a yurt, well, as they're known in Mongolia, in a gur. And they saw what had happened, and as soon as they saw, they came running towards me. They actually caught that horse, and then they managed to bring him back to me, and they helped me put everything back together. So that was the first kind of, big fiasco that I experienced out there. But every day there was something that happened, a couple of days later, the saddle breaking again that I had to kind of fix with my own hands and the limited tools that I have. Points where I felt, quite scared as a solo female traveler because, I saw people approaching in the distance, didn't know what their intentions were. So every day brought a kind of new, fresh crisis. But in a way, I feel like that's, overcoming each crisis one by one really made me feel like, okay, I can do this, right? And gave me so much confidence in my own skills, capabilities, in the fact that I can do hard things. And that's quite an empowering feeling.
Absolutely. The sense of resilience that you must have felt in those moments, and then how did it feel to get kind of to your end point?
Well, this adventure didn't actually have a happy ending. So instead of the 2 weeks that I had planned, after about 1 week, I was just kind of riding along as I did every day. Nothing crazy happened, except when I turned a corner and my horse got spooked by, again, sheep, goats. No idea why, but I fell off. So he threw me off and I fell off and I fell onto the ground. I was not wearing a helmet, which is very bad, I know, but it is what it is. And I fell on my forehead. That was a pretty bad fall, and had a concussion, felt very dizzy, felt like I wasn't, like I felt a little bit scared, honestly, because I knew that a concussion
Felt
could turn out,
surprised.
yeah, it could turn into something quite serious. So, for a while, I kind of I guess I couldn't decide whether I should go and seek help, something that any reasonable and responsible person probably would do, or whether I should just kind of get over it and keep going and hope for
Yeah.
the best. I mean, luckily, I decided that I should go and seek help because I just wasn't sure how serious it was.
Mhm.
But I didn't want to risk my life just for pride, just for being able to say, "Oh, I completed my 2-week trek." So yeah, for the rest of that day, I just walked with the horses. I walked about 25 kilometers to the nearest
Oh my
settlement that I
goodness.
knew was there because of a map that I had. And yeah, that was it. That's kind of how it ended. When I got to the settlement, I was taken care of by some locals, and they called the horse truck driver who came the next day and picked me up. That was it.
Goodness. Wow.
And
What a
and
story.
yeah, and I remember saying to myself at the end of that trek, like, I'll never ever do this again, ever. Like, no way. I'll never go horse riding ever again. But obviously, time passes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're like, "Oh, actually that was a lot of fun. That was, type 2 fun."
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely have plans for more horse treks in the future.
Really? Where would be your dream place to do that?
Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing places, but I guess like Patagonia, like,
Mm.
doesn't that sound quite dreamy? You know what I mean?
In that
Like,
epic landscape again.
yes, with the gauchos. Oh, yeah, that sounds like fun.
Very sexy, I would say.
Love it.
So, I normally do the traditional travel diaries format is going through the 7 chapters of your life's travel diaries. But I feel like we just need to throw that format out the window and just carry on chatting because the way that you approach travel is unconventional and not linear. So let's just carry on that way.
Sounds good.
I'll try and weave these in as we chat. But traditionally, the next chapter that we talk about, really, I mean, I feel like we've talked about the place where you learned a lot about yourself. But
Mm.
where would you say in this phase of your life was the first that you fell in love with?
I think one place that I really, really fell in love with, and that was a kind of unexpected destination, and this might sound surprising, was Pakistan.
Mm.
So that was actually my second kind of place that I traveled to when I kind of, left my old life behind. From Nepal, I went to Pakistan because a friend who was living there at the time, working for an NGO, invited me over and she was like, "Hey,
Oh,
Pakistan is
right.
great." And I was like, "Pakistan, really? That sounds dangerous. And I don't know,
Yeah,
not sure
exactly.
about this." But she was like, she really insisted. And she said, "You're gonna fall in love with it. You'll see. Just come." So I did. I went to Pakistan to visit my friends and ended up doing a little solo trip up to the mountains of Pakistan. And one thing that I think everybody should know about this amazing country is that, I think a lot of the images that we see are that it's, quite like we imagine it to be quite dusty and, quite just dangerous and dusty. I think those are the two words that a lot of people would imagine.
Yeah.
But it's so incredibly diverse. In the north, you've got the Himalayas, the Karakoram Mountains, like some of the tallest peaks in the world are in Pakistan. And then you travel south, and there you've got the deserts and the Arabian Sea. It's
Mm.
just such a rich place. There's so much diversity in terms of landscape and culture. And I guess I went there and I was just so shocked that a place that I had known very little about and that I had always imagined in this one limited way actually just expanded, like blew my mind, really.
Mhm.
And yeah, I completely fell in love with it. And I fell in love with the people and the hospitality. Just truly an amazing destination. So yeah, Pakistan, Pakistan.
And so you started, was it in northern Pakistan?
Yes, yeah. So I spent some time there, but I traveled all around the country to a lot of areas that I think, are out of bounds for travelers because I got to do some really amazing projects up there that kind of gave us access to spots that are just not on the tourist map and completely inaccessible. I saw, traditions and cultures that I had never heard of up until then. Really amazing places.
What surprised you most from the local people, would you say?
I think there is a sense that, again, there's this idea that, oh, it's dangerous out there, that, you won't be welcome, especially as a solo female traveler, as a woman, a foreign woman.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found was actually the exact opposite. When I was traveling through Pakistan, whether I was alone or with locals or with friends, in any constellation, I always felt extremely welcome. People would always kind of, when they saw me out on the street, they would say, "Oh my God, like, can you come over to my house? I want to make you some chai, some tea. You'll meet my mom, you'll meet my parents, you'll meet my family." People were so incredibly welcoming. And I think,
Mm.
the way that I kind of understood it just through conversations was that a lot of people told me that, look, we love guests. Hospitality is part of our culture. We revere guests. They are a blessing. And we also want to make sure that everybody who comes to Pakistan leaves with a positive image of Pakistan in their minds. We want people to know that we are good people. And I just remember someone saying these very words to me, like, "Please tell the world that we are good people."
Well, that breaks my heart in a
Yeah.
way. I mean, it's wonderful that you are documenting your time there and sharing about how wonderful your experience was.
Mm.
It breaks my heart a little bit that, like you say, the headlines shape
Mhm.
our perception of a country, and that the local people feel that.
Yeah, they definitely do, and they know it. They're very well aware of how most of the world thinks of their country. So I think it's amazing when when travelers can go there with an open mind and really open themselves up to the culture. I think that's a gift that goes in both directions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I highly recommend Pakistan. Maybe not as like your first travel destination, but I think for the traveler who seeks something a little bit different, it's such an interesting place. My gosh.
Do you think it will become more popular as a kind of tourist destination?
I think I think it will. I think it should, but I also worry that it doesn't have all the necessary kind of stops in place to make that growth sustainable.
Right.
There is definitely the issue of kind of governance around tourism that's a little bit tricky, a little bit difficult. There's a lot of
Mhm.
corruption in Pakistan. There's a lot of unsustainable developments. There's a lot of kind of get rich quick kind of schemes in terms of, building crappy hotels. And yeah, it's just, I feel like the people of Pakistan are truly amazing, so hospitable, but I feel like the people who are at the top are not necessarily helping those people really kind of benefit from a sustainable kind of tourism. So
Mm.
I think, kind of my wish whenever someone goes to Pakistan is like, go stay with a local family, do a homestay, don't
Yeah.
stay in these crappy hotels that you don't know who built them, who they belong to, that are not in line with like local architecture. Go stay with a local family, seek out those kinds of experiences and opportunities.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And applicable to many countries, really.
Absolutely. So many. So true.
Mm.
Hmm.
It sounds like it means a lot to you, perhaps one of your all-time favorite destinations. But if you had to pick one aside from Mongolia and Pakistan, where would you pick as your all-time favorite today? It changes, I know, for my guests from
Oh
day to
my
day.
gosh. You've just stripped two of my favorites out of
I
my
know.
kind
I'm
of,
so sorry.
yeah, gosh, where do I go from here? Actually, and this is gonna sound perhaps maybe a little basic, maybe a little controversial, but I actually really, really love the United States. Um,
Mhm.
for like as a traveler. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, let's just ignore the politics and all that madness.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I love the US because it is just so incredibly diverse. You've got this is a country that is basically the size of a continent. It stretches across, yeah, from one ocean to another. You've got places like Alaska, which are just so out there, so incredibly remote. Like, what an amazing adventure destination. Then you've got places like Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, like desert and mountains and canyons. There's just so much. There was a time in my life where I really really wanted to live in the United States because I was just so enamored with the incredible diversity of the landscape. And there is that sense that you can, of course you can't kind of wild camp everywhere, but there's a lot of places where you can go camping and beautiful wild
Good
places.
infrastructure in the national
Yeah.
parks, isn't there, in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah.
There's an encouragement to get out into nature, and that kind of hiking culture as well that isn't necessarily like the same in
Yes.
Europe, and well, sadly in England at least.
So true. There's so many opportunities to go out hiking and trekking. There's amazing trails. And yeah, it's just a great place. Like, again, setting aside whatever our differences may be, it's not the cheapest of destinations. And yes, there is traffic and there's highways, but yeah, I think as soon as you get away from all that noise and all that traffic into some of the more remote spots,
Mm.
there's places where you feel like you're the only person in the entire world. And that's in the United States, like,
Yeah,
the same place that has given birth to New York City and Hollywood. Like, you can
yeah,
go out into the mountains and just be completely alone with the wolves and the grizzlies. So yeah, I love the US and I can't wait to go back quite soon.
me too, me too. Well, zooming in, is there a particular spot in particular, in a particular state, that would be your
Mm.
favorite?
I think Montana did it for me. Gosh, it is just mountains and forests and grizzly bears and wild nature and wildlife. And, you know, I think Montana just really kind of like a little bit like Mongolia. It does transport you to a different time, a completely different
Mm.
time.
Mm.
Like when I was there and I spent a couple of months in Montana, I actually got my dog in Montana as well when she
Oh,
was a
no
little
way.
puppy. Yeah, that's where I got
So he's an
him.
American.
He is American. Yeah, indeed he is. He's an American German Shepherd. Um, but I got him there and I spent the first few weeks of our life together in this little cabin in the woods with no power, no running water. And I just remember waking up one day and being like, oh my God, I think I left his kibble outside. And I went outside to check, and it was scattered all over the place. And I was like, oh my God, did like a bear come and tear the bag apart? And, but you just kind of, you're in that place and it's so wild that you really reevaluate, I think, your existence a little bit, because you have to think about things in a very, very different way from, say, when
Yeah,
you're living in a city, you're actually out
yeah.
there in the wild nature, like living alongside it. So it's incredible. It's so, so wild.
Did you hang out with the cowboys
I did actually, yes. I did hang out with the Cowboys in Montana. I went to
and
see,
cowgirls? Is it
y-
cowgirls is the equivalent? I'm
yes.
not sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I went to see this ranching family, and I made a film with them, learning how to be a cowgirl. So, learning about like kind of rodeo style riding, learning about the work, that they do and everything that it takes to actually be a good cowboy,
Mm.
rounding up cows and kind of patrolling your big ranch and, being out there in Montana on this 2,000-acre massive, massive ranch with these
Mm.
beautiful quarter horses. You're kind of sitting in a Western saddle and there's all these guys kind of running around you, doing their cowboy thing and having whiskey. Like that is just, I'll admit, I have not watched Yellowstone because I'm kind of worried that it's going to ruin Montana for me. Uh, but like I can imagine that that's kind of what it felt like.
Mm. And then you also mentioned Alaska. And of course, you did this epic drive from Mexico up there. Was it that way round, starting in Mexico up to Alaska?
So I actually, yes, I picked up, basically I shipped my truck, my 20-year-old Land Rover Defender named Odyssey. I shipped her from Europe to Mexico in the first place. So I kind of flew over, waited for the truck to arrive in Mexico, and then picked her up. She'd been obviously on a cargo ship, and then drove her across, well, Central America a little bit, and then up across the United States, got my dog in Montana, and then kept driving up north to Alaska, to the north of Alaska, no less, which
Wow.
Alaska is a very, very big place. And so when you say you're driving to Alaska, that really doesn't mean that much because you can reach the southernmost tip of Alaska, but still be very, very, a very long way away from the northernmost edge. And yeah, I mean, kind of my goal was to make it to the very top, which is kind of the end of the road. It's called the
And the
Dalton
world.
Highway. And yeah, actually, it really feels like it. It does feel like it. It's one of the northernmost roads in the world, and yeah, it's called the Dalton Highway. And I think, you know, it's become famous because of the show about these ice truckers. You know,
Oh,
the
yeah.
guys who kind of drive up in the north of Alaska. And it truly is a very, very wild road because it's called the Dalton Highway, but it's not really a highway. It's 400 miles of a dirt road that leads across some of,
Really? It's
yeah, it
not
leads
proper
across.
paved road.
No, no, no. I mean, there's little bits of it that are paved, but most of it is unpaved because the conditions up there are so difficult, so tough that, you know, it would just take too much work to repair the pavement all the time, the asphalt. So they just leave it like as a dirt track, and that's what they use to get up there. And it's really some of the most remote areas in the world. You know, you can imagine the north of Alaska, you've got, this is like tundra. There's no trees growing there anymore. It's so far up north. It's just massive mountains, you know, sprawling across the landscape. There's snow there most of the year. There's polar bears prowling these areas. Like, this is just, I mean, I'm just getting shivers thinking about it. It's one of the wildest places on our planet. And then there's this tiny road that cuts across it where, you know, you've got these big trucks that drive it. They basically service and kind of transport oil from the very north of Alaska. There's a little town there at the very top, or town I think is a very generous word, a settlement, an industrial park, I should say. So, you know, you've got these truckers who travel up and down this road, and then you've got the occasional traveler like myself and my friends who traveled there together in our two Land Rover Defenders. And yeah, it's a very extreme place, truly one of the wildest I had ever been to.
Uh,
But yeah, I mean, you got to be prepared that for 400 miles, there's only one gas station and there's no mechanics, no towns along the way. So you really have to be very self-sufficient.
and you're sleeping in your car in the tent
Yep,
on your
yep, yep.
car.
No hotels along the way. There is a hotel way up north in the kind of that settlement at the far edge. By the way, the town is called Dead Horse, which is just a
What a
provocative
name.
name itself. You're like, let's go to Dead Horse. Like, yeah, why not? Sounds great. Um, but yeah,
Reassuring.
just yeah. But we were camping in our trucks along the way, you know, just sleeping in rooftop tents, and yeah, so magical. In Dead Horse, there is a culture of always keeping your car keys inside your car, even when you leave your car out on the street, because there's polar bears there, and sometimes they'll get into town. So if you're trying to get away from a polar bear, you should, like, the culture is that anyone should be able to run into any truck that's anywhere parked on the side of the road, be able to get inside it and drive off.
Stop.
So yeah, it's a very special place.
Oh, wow. That feels
Yeah.
almost as wild as Mongolia.
Truly, it probably
Yeah.
is. Yes,
Yeah.
that's Alaska.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, I mean, all of your destinations are hidden gems in their own right. But if you had to share with us a hidden gem, a place that my listeners might not know so much about that you love, where would you tell us about?
Mm. I'll give you a place that's a little bit closer to
Mhm.
home for me, and I think maybe some of our listeners today, because it's in Europe, and it's a place that I think a lot of people don't really associate with adventure and beauty, but I reckon it's one of the most beautiful places in Europe, and probably my favorite country in Europe, and that is Romania.
Oh.
You know, Romania is home to the Carpathian Mountains, which I actually live in the Carpathian Mountains too, just on the Polish side of them.
Mhm.
And Romania is just really, again, that, you know, that kind of, if we're speaking of wild destinations, it's one of the last remaining wild destinations in Europe. You've got, there's so much, like so many cute villages high up in the mountains. There's a lot of that shepherding culture that still survives. There's a lot of incredible opportunities for hiking and trekking, just nature, nature, nature. And it's not so far away, and it's very, you know, drivable by car. A lot of people speak English. It's truly extremely underrated, in my opinion.
Mm.
And I really do believe that it deserves, a little bit more
Are
attention.
there any places in particular in Romania that you'd say would be a good starting point? Transylvania?
I think Transylvania is a pretty good bet. It has some really amazing roads. So let's say if you rent a car, you can drive up and down these incredible mountain roads with plenty of switchbacks and just amazing views. I think the Via Transalpina is one of them. I think that was featured in Top Gear at one point as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Very well deserved. There is, in Transylvania, you've got castles, there's a lot of culture, beautiful towns and villages. So that's definitely a safe bet. I would also recommend the region of Maramuresh. It's a little bit less known, high up in the north. I think it may be quite close to Transylvania. It's like Transylvania's less known cousin, but just idyllic landscapes. Again, beautiful villages with wooden houses, and you can stay in these beautiful like family homestays. So it's truly just a gorgeous place and quite easily accessible. So yeah, I
Fabulous.
think that would be my recommendation.
Wonderful hidden
Has
gem.
anyone recommended Romania before?
I'm trying to think. I think a long time ago, Transylvania came up for slow travel as being a lovely place to cycle through, but
Yeah.
not recently. And I think that it is a wonderful hidden gem to have. And as you say,
Mm.
like how wonderful that it's really on our doorstep here in Europe. So we need
Yeah.
to,
Direct flights.
yeah,
Direct
add it to
flights
our
from
bucket
most
list.
European countries.
Some are slightly less accessible that I did want to ask you about is Socotra. Quite the polar opposite of accessibility. But
Oh
I
yeah.
really wanted to chat to you about it because my most intrepid guests, I would say, Lonely Planet founder Tony Wheeler, Simon Calder, the travel editor. This is a destination that these guys had on their bucket list when they came on, the
Mm.
place that they wanted to get to. You got there. You ended up being stuck there during COVID. So tell me, what is Socotra like? Is it as otherworldly and kind of mystical as travelers have in their minds?
Yeah, I definitely had a very special experience of Socotra. Let me just put it that way. So just to give a little bit of context, I spent the COVID lockdown there. So 3 months basically. 3 months of just being out on this, amazing, ethereal, otherworldly island while the world was collapsing around us.
Yeah.
So very special and kind of surreal experience. And out there there was no COVID on the island, and people were just kind of going about their everyday lives. So it was very different. And feel like Socotra is very much a magical place. There is something about this island that makes you feel like you're almost in like a parallel reality, like a parallel world. All the fauna and flora of the place is just incredible. They've got, there's so many plants and trees that don't exist anywhere else. You can only find them on
The
Socotra.
dragon blood tree.
So the dragon blood trees being one of them, yes, just absolutely amazing. And I actually have a tattoo of a dragon blood tree that I got after coming back from Socotra. I don't know if you can see it, but
Oh,
it's a very
it's
meaningful,
beautiful.
um, yeah, just such a beautiful, beautiful creation in this world that we have. And I would say Socotra is, I think, for me, a very complicated place because a little bit like with Pakistan, it's a place that, is experiencing a boom, a lot of attention. A lot of people want to come visit it, but there's no infrastructure to support the tourism. And I mean, I don't know exactly how much it's changed in the last 3 or 4 years since I've been there last, but I almost don't want to go back. I'm quite worried about going back. And I know that, I do blame myself a little bit because, my series being out there on Socotra, I'm sure has influenced the influx of tourists in some way. Of course, I can't blame myself entirely, and neither do I want to give myself that level of influence. But I'm sure that there's something about my time there that pulled a lot of people to the
Mm.
island. And I do worry about it. You know, there's not much that I can do. I'm not Socotri, I'm not Yemeni, but I do feel like there's a lot of people out there who just want to make money very quickly. You know, tourists are a pretty easy way to do that. And so I worry about
Do you
it.
worry more
I do.
about the locals or the tourists that are going there who might be in a tricky situation?
Yeah, I mean, from what I hear, there's a lot of people going there who maybe don't have that same level of respect for nature and the
Right.
natural
Right.
world as many of us do. From what I hear, there's a lot of, you know, noise pollution. There's a lot of disrespect for the culture, and there's a lot of trashing of the place.
Oh, that's awful to hear.
Yeah, so Socotra doesn't really have any like facilities to deal with with trash and rubbish, for example, you know, at that very basic level. Like, you know, tourists, you know, coming in and bringing in, well, generating rubbish, you know, on a much larger scale.
Mm.
Whereas, you know, the kind of the more traditional Socotri way is much more sustainable, using sustainable materials and you know, I just feel like it's yeah, I understand that people want to see it, and I get why, because it is so special. But I guess I just wish that there was more of a push for sustainability. Now, that's difficult to expect from
Mm.
the Yemeni government. You know, I mean, this is a country at war,
Yeah.
and Socotra being kind of like a safe zone, you know, it's still very much affected by this, you know, government in flux and conflict in complete disruption. So, yeah, I guess if someone does go to Socotra, I would just be really, really careful and, you know, try and be very, very understanding of the fact that this is a very conservative place, you know, where you can't take pictures of women, for example, where you should not be wearing a bikini on the beach, despite what many social media posts will have you believe.
Mm.
This is a place where, you know, anything you carry in, you should carry out. It's a very fragile ecosystem. So yeah, I think, you know, that's my only that's my kind of gripe with
Yeah.
Socotra and Socotra tourism. I want to go back, but I think I just need to get ready mentally for a bit of a shock.
Yeah. I guess when you are traveling to such almost undiscovered places, then that's the risk
Mm.
that you'll probably have for each of them if you were to return. And that kind of,
Yeah.
what are the last frontiers left? I mean, where would you say hasn't been touched by YouTube or Instagram? What do you think? Where are the last kind
I
of
don't know if I should
corners of the earth?
I don't know if I should put it out there because that means that people will start going
Yeah,
there.
that's true.
I feel like there's still a lot of places that you know, that haven't been turned into content,
Yeah.
especially. And I think a lot of them are, you know, across Central Asia, and I'm not talking about countries, but I'm really talking about
Mhm.
regions, about areas of wilderness that, you know, people haven't really reached easily or haven't been able to reach easily. There's whole, you know, there's swathes of Russia. And again, whatever you think about Russian politics, I mean, you know, I, as a Polish person, have very strong opinions, but I also appreciate that Russia is an extremely culturally diverse and rich country. And there's, you know, there's so much of it that I would love to visit if I could one day. But let's see how that unfolds. There's, you know, there's huge areas, of course, of Africa, especially around Central Africa, also around the Sahara,
Mm.
much less accessible. Some of them very difficult to access for tourists. Some of them even impossible to access for tourists. You know, there's Canada. Look at the north of Canada, like it's so much, and so few people have been there. You know, there's Arctic regions in the winter that are, again, only for people who have really, you know, just really for the toughest individuals out there.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a lot, but I think that some of the most unexplored remote places require grit and skill and experience. And I think that's kind of difficult to come by in this kind of YouTube creator economy.
And you said in your fabulous book that it became less about travel and more about freedom. So, what
Mm,
does freedom, as we kind of wrap up today's episode, what does freedom mean to you now?
mm. I used to think that freedom was all about, you know, picking up your backpack and setting off into the world and going traveling. That's what I used to think that freedom was when I first started this journey. But I think now I see, kind of having, really traveled the world far and wide, having done some really crazy adventures, and then having come home, I think freedom has really changed for me. And now I see it as being able to choose, being able to choose a life that fits you, a life that feels authentic to you, a life that fulfills you, a life that makes you feel alive. And having the freedom to live that life is just one of the most extraordinary gifts. And I don't think you have to go far to feel free at all. I would even argue that, a lot of people that I've met along the way who, have never left their country, somewhere on the edge of the world, are some of the most free people in the world. So, yeah, freedom, it's all in the mind,
What a
really.
beautiful way to wrap up the episode. Eva, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your travel diaries with us. It has been such a pleasure to chat. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been so much fun. So, yeah, here's to travel.
Here's to travel.